Hello everyone, this will be the 21st chapter of The Second Life of the Guardian, written and read by Insect Overlord. This chapter is titled, Thank Kwame for Gullible Guards, and has content warnings for temporary child death, Overhaul's quirk, cuts and blood, mentioned blood draws, vaguely implied childhood sexual abuse, and Overhaul being creepy. Izuku had been with Overhaul for the past 3 days and hadn't gotten even one chance to be alone with Eri. Overhaul took her with him everywhere, like a lapdog. She didn't even have her own room, just a mat in Overhaul's quarters. He was sure he could find a way to escape by himself with how much Overhaul and his underlings underestimated him, but he wasn't about to leave without the girl. For someone who preached the superiority of quirklessness so much, Overhaul sure thought Izuku was powerless. So far, he has had 5 sessions with the psychopath, and he felt like he was going insane. The cuts and blood draws he could deal with, but the pain that came from Overhaul's quirk was the worst he had ever felt, and he was no stranger to pain. Izuku assumed Overhaul's quirk was made from both destruction and creation magic. It was an amazing quirk, from what Izuku could tell. One that could not only take things apart, but put them back together. He was sure Plag and Tiki would not be happy to know how their blessing was being used. Even still, Izuku would take Overhaul's quirk over the way he would caress his cheek and call him his good little boy any day. When Izuku wasn't being taken apart, he was left alone in his room. It was bigger than his room at home, but far emptier. Its only contents were a plain mattress with a thin blanket and pillow. Izuku had spent the past hour making a fort out of the 3 items, and he was pretty proud of himself. Aside from the bedding, there was also a camera in the far corner. Because he never knew when he was being watched, Izuku couldn't use his quirk to entertain himself. At least, not if he wanted to be found out and disposed of by Overhaul, which would mean he couldn't rescue Eri. It also meant he couldn't make a lockpick to explore the compound and potentially locate the girls to escape. Despite the occasional torture, Izuku was mostly bored, and with nothing to occupy his mind, his thoughts would travel to his parents and May. He really wanted a hug from his mom. Hell, he would even settle for a hug from his dad. Eri was more important, though. Izuku had to save her. What kind of hero would he be if he couldn't save one girl? Izuku was knocked out of his thoughts by his door clicking unlocked. One of Overhaul's underlings opened it. His name was Chronostasis, Izuku thought. Good. Out of all the people he had interacted with here, he was the most likely to answer Izuku's questions. Izuku scrambled up from his spot, starfished on the floor of his fort, to follow him. He recognized the direction. They were headed to the medical wing. Will I get to see Eri today? Izuku blinked innocently up at the man. He sighed. Well, she's with the boss, so I guess so. Izuku mentally pumped his fist. Maybe today was the day. When they arrived, Overhaul was seated in his chair with Eri standing beside him as usual. Izuku made his way to the medical cot, and the man stood up. Scream and you know what happens, Izuku. He recited in monotone. He had said the same thing every time since their first session. After Izuku's outburst, he realized he could use Eri as leverage to get Izuku to cooperate. Izuku had screamed the first time he was remade, and Overhaul had turned around and used his quirk on Eri until she passed out. Izuku didn't scream again. Even still, he didn't know if he was actually protecting Eri or not. There was the very real possibility that Overhaul would simply experiment on her when Izuku wasn't there. But he was trying. He just hoped it was enough. Overhaul was 2 cuts in when a knock came at the door, and a different underling, Mimic if Izuku remembered correctly, entered. This better be important, Overhaul ground out. Mimic gulped. Sorry, boss. It's just, there's a bunch of pros at the door asking for you. Said they're looking for a kid who went missing in the area. We tried to send him away, but they insisted they meet every person who lives here. Since you're on the lease, he trailed off. Overhaul sighed. grabbed a bandage, and messily wrapped Izuku's arm. Then he hefted Eri up by her armpits and placed her on the bed beside Izuku. "Watch them," he ordered Mimic before storming out of the room. He left them with Mimic. Out of all of the villains that operated on this compound, Mimic was by far the most gullible. Izuku couldn't believe his luck. Or maybe he could. He was Tiki's bug, after all. Izuku only stayed silent until he was sure Overhaul was out of hearing range. Then he turned to Mimic. Can we go back to our room now?" he asked innocently. Eri looked up at him with poorly masked fear, and he smiled at her. "Overhaul always lets us go back to our room after our sessions," he lied. Well, the boss told me to watch you," he defended, but he was already sounding unsure. Izuku looked at him like he was stupid. Yeah, from the camera, duh." Mimic still looked hesitant, so Izuku made one last push. He sat back and crossed his arms. "What do you think Overhaul will say when I tell him you didn't follow procedure? We go back to our rooms after sessions. That's the rule." I knew that. I was just testing you. Let's go," he stumbled out. "Got him." When they were alone in Izuku's room, he let out the breath he was holding. Finally. He turned to Eri, intending to convince her to run away with him, when her quiet voice breathed out, "Why did you lie? You'll get in big trouble." Izuku smiled a sad smile and crouched in front of her and whispered, "Don't worry about it, Eri. We're going to leave this place and you won't have to worry about Overhaul anymore." She looked up at him with delicate hope before directing her gaze back to the floor. "But I'm not a good girl. I make people disappear. I'm only good if I'm helping him." If it was possible, Izuku's smile became sadder. "You are good, and you won't hurt me. Let me show you something, Eri," he said, walking towards his fort, Eri trailing behind him. When they were both hidden under the tent, out of sight of the camera, Izuku whispered to her, "I actually do have a power." Her eyes widened. "I can make a charm that will let anyone who you accidentally disappear come back. Do you want to see?" She nodded eagerly, believing him completely with childlike naivety. Izuku put a hand between them and focused on his quirk. With a sparkle of red light, a small ladybug-themed hair clip appeared in his palm. Eri stared at it in wonder. He clipped the charm to her hair. "Now, even if you use your quirk on me and make me disappear, I can always come back when my lucky charm disappears," he vowed. "Promise?" Eri asked, eyes searching his face for deceit. "I promise," he said with more conviction than he ever had in his lives. Eri threw her arms around him and hugged him. This concludes Chapter 21 of The Second Life of a Guardian. I hope you guys like this one. The arc is almost over, and even though it was only 3 chapters, does 3 chapters even count as an entire arc? I have no idea. But anyways, the next chapter should be up soon. Thank you so much for listening.